Apple isn't advertising the most important parts of the iPhone 18 Pro Max, and that silence is deliberate. Behind these camera leaks and subtle design tweaks are decisions that quietly reshape how iPhones capture reality, connect to networks, and even survive long-term use. The scary part isn't what Apple added, it's what they're preparing to remove. If you enjoy uncovering the details Apple never puts on stage, the ones that explain why things change instead of just what changes, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who thinks phone upgrades stopped being interesting years ago. Now here's where the iPhone 18 Pro Max becomes far more interesting than it looks. On the surface, Apple is playing it safe. Familiar frame, familiar layout, almost like a pause year. But Apple never pauses without a reason. This device feels less like a destination and more like a setup, quietly moving pieces into place for something much bigger. Let's start with the front of the phone, because this is where Apple's long-term plan starts to leak through. Face ID slipping under the display isn't just about aesthetics. Apple is testing how much critical hardware it can hide without compromising trust. Once Face ID disappears visually, the screen becomes a blank canvas. That opens the door to future designs where nothing is visibly interrupting the display at all. And that's not a one-year goal, it's a multi-generation transition. What makes this more interesting is dynamic islands staying alive. If Apple truly wanted a clean screen, they could have killed it. Instead, they shrink it, reposition it, and keep it deeply integrated into iOS. That tells us Apple sees dynamic island less as hardware and more as behavior. It's becoming software muscle memory. Eventually, when the hardware no longer needs to exist, users will still expect it to be there. Apple isn't removing it yet, because they're training people first. Then there's the camera system, which looks like a typical big upgrade, until you think about what Apple is actually changing. Variable aperture isn't just a camera feature, it's a philosophical shift. For years, Apple leaned heavily on computational photography, sometimes to the point where images didn't feel real anymore. Variable aperture brings physical optics back into the equation. Light behaves naturally again. Depth looks organic instead of simulated. This isn't Apple chasing specs. It's Apple quietly admitting software alone hit its limit. But notice the hesitation. There's a real chance this only appears on the Pro Max. That's Apple testing risk. Moving parts introduce cost, thickness concerns, and repair complexity. Apple doesn't roll those out universally unless it's sure users will feel the difference immediately. If people don't react strongly enough, this feature could quietly disappear again, just like previous camera experiments that never returned. At the same time, Apple is simplifying other areas and not in a consumer-friendly way. The camera control button losing its touch sensitivity isn't innovation. It's consolidation. Fewer sensors, fewer failures, cheaper repairs. Apple knows most users never master those gestures anyway. This is Apple optimizing for scale, not power users. And it's a pattern we're seeing more often. Features that look advanced at launch quietly get trimmed once they stop being essential to marketing. Under the hood, the A20 Pro chip does what everyone expects: faster, cooler, more efficient. That's not the real story here. The real shift is Apple's C2 modem. By fully moving away from Qualcomm, Apple controls how your phone connects, how efficiently it holds signal, and how future network features are deployed. This isn't about speed today, it's about leverage tomorrow. When Apple owns the modem, it decides how cellular evolves on iPhone, not the carrier and not another chip maker. And that ties directly into the most overlooked change of all: satellite connectivity. Apple started with emergency SOS, but that was just the public-friendly introduction. The long-term goal is obvious. Apple wants iPhones to remain connected even when traditional infrastructure fails, not just in emergencies, but eventually as a fallback layer that users don't even think about. Once that becomes normal, cellular networks stop being the single point of failure, and Apple gains a massive amount of influence over global connectivity expectations. Put all of this together, and the iPhone 18 Pro Max starts to feel very different. It's not flashy because it doesn't need to be. Apple is laying groundwork, hiding hardware, reducing complexity where users won't notice, reintroducing physical systems where software went too far, and quietly taking control of the pipes that keep iPhones connected to the world. The uncomfortable part is realizing that some of these changes won't pay off this year, or even next year. They're meant to make future iPhones feel inevitable. When something finally disappears completely, people won't remember when it started fading. They'll just accept that it's gone. And once you see the iPhone 18 Pro Max through that lens, a bigger question starts to form. Which of these changes are stepping stones? Which are experiments Apple can walk back? And which ones are quietly locking us into an iPhone future that will feel normal only because the transition happened slowly enough that nobody panicked?